In the turbulent era of the Middle Ages, when kingdoms clashed and castles dotted the landscape, the art of the siege was a grim reality. Powerful lords, clad in iron and steel, would marshal their forces and surround the fortresses of their enemies, deploying colossal siege engines capable of tearing down even the most formidable walls. Yet what awaited within these besieged fortresses was a fate often worse than the onslaught itself. Prisoners of war, once the proud defenders of their castle, found themselves thrust into a new and nightmarish existence. The brutality they faced, the gnawing hunger, the relentless terror, were all a testament to the dark underbelly of medieval warfare. In the words of Italian diplomat and philosopher Niccolo Machiavelli, war is just when it is necessary. Arms are permissible when there is no hope except in arms. In the realm of sieges, this brutal necessity was as starkly apparent as the towering siege engines dotting the horizon. Join us as we journey back to the medieval era, exploring the grim reality of siege warfare and the fate of those unfortunate enough to become prisoners. Welcome to the Diary of Julius Caesar. Laying the groundwork, unveiling the art of medieval siege preparations. When it comes to medieval warfare, sieges were a crucial aspect of many military campaigns. In order to successfully besiege a castle or fortified city, commanders and their armies had to engage in meticulous planning and logistics. This involved assessing the strengths and weaknesses of their adversaries, procuring the necessary resources and manpower, and devising effective strategies to breach the enemy's defenses. One of the most critical components of a medieval siege was the gathering of supplies. Armies required vast amounts of food, water, and other essentials to support not only the soldiers, but also the horses, work animals, and laborers. Military leaders such as Richard the Lionheart, who famously besieged the coastal fortress of Acre during the Third Crusade in 1189 to 1191, had to secure supply lines and establish a steady flow of resources to maintain their forces throughout the prolonged engagement. In addition to supplies, the recruitment of troops played a pivotal role in the preparation for a siege. Commanders needed a diverse range of skilled personnel, from archers and infantrymen to engineers and sappers. Siege warfare was a collaborative effort that hinged on the combined expertise of these various professionals. For instance, during the famous Siege of Orleans in 1428 to 1429, Joan of Arc rallied the French forces, providing them with renewed vigor and tactical acumen that contributed to their eventual success in lifting the English siege. The construction of siege equipment was another crucial aspect of the preparations. Teams of carpenters, blacksmiths, and laborers worked tirelessly to build a range of formidable siege engines, each designed to overcome specific obstacles. The trebuchet, for example, was a powerful counterweight catapult capable of hurling massive stones and other projectiles over great distances. It was used to great effect during the Siege of Jerusalem in 1099, where the Crusaders employed these machines to bring down the city's formidable walls. Furthermore, battering rams and siege towers were essential tools of the trade. Battering rams were employed to break through gates and walls, while siege towers, such as the ones used in the Siege of Constantinople in 1453, allowed attacking forces to scale the enemy's defenses and engage them in close combat. The development and deployment of these engines required significant investment in time and resources, but their effectiveness in breaking through enemy fortifications made them indispensable. As part of their preparations, military leaders also had to gather intelligence on their adversaries. Scouts and spies were sent to gather information on the enemy's defenses, the layout of the city or castle, and the morale of the inhabitants. Armed with this knowledge, commanders could devise a plan of attack tailored to exploit their enemy's weaknesses. In some cases, this might involve feigning retreats, launching diversionary attacks, or even engaging in subterfuge and intrigue to sow discord within the enemy ranks. During this period, psychological warfare was a vital component of siege preparation. Military leaders would often employ various tactics to demoralize and weaken the resolve of their opponents. For instance, during the siege of Château Gaillard in 1203 to 1204, the French King Philip II ordered the mutilation of prisoners in full view of the castle's defenders, hoping to strike fear into their hearts and hasten the fortress's surrender. The Siege Master's Playbook, unraveling the strategies of medieval warfare. When it comes to the art of siege warfare, military commanders throughout the medieval period employed a diverse range of tactics and strategies to outmaneuver and overcome their adversaries. From encircling fortresses and disrupting supply lines to leveraging psychological warfare, these battle-hardened leaders left no stone unturned in their quest for victory. One of the most time-tested strategies employed during a siege was the encirclement of the targeted fortress or city. By deploying troops to surround the enemy's defenses, commanders could effectively cut off any potential escape routes, making it increasingly difficult for the defenders to receive reinforcements or supplies. The infamous Siege of Orleans, 1428 to 1429, saw the English forces, led by the Earl of Salisbury, employ this very tactic in an attempt to strangle the city and force its defenders into submission. Disrupting supply lines was another crucial aspect of siege warfare. By cutting off access to essential resources such as food, water, and materials, besieging forces aimed to weaken the morale and fighting capabilities of their opponents. One notable example is the Siege of Acre, 1189 to 1191, during the Third Crusade, where Richard the Lionheart and his forces successfully cut off the city's supply routes by sea, ultimately leading to the city's surrender. In addition to encircling and starving out their enemies, medieval commanders also sought to exploit the natural and man-made features of the landscape. During the Siege of Château Galard, 1203 to 1204, French King Philip II ordered the construction of a dam on the River Seine to flood the castle's moat, rendering its defenses useless and facilitating a successful assault. Psychological warfare played a significant role in many medieval sieges. Commanders would often employ various tactics to demoralize and intimidate the enemy, such as displaying the mutilated bodies of captured soldiers or spreading false information about the strength of their forces. One particularly intriguing example of psychological warfare occurred during the Siege of Tenochtitlan, 1519 to 1521, when Spanish conquistador Hernán Cortés and his forces leveraged the defenders' fear of the supernatural by exploiting a solar eclipse, which they claimed to be a sign of divine favor. Another notable strategy employed during medieval sieges was the use of sappers and mining. These specialized engineers would tunnel beneath the walls and fortifications of a castle or city, planting explosives or wooden supports that could be burned away, causing the structure to collapse. The Siege of Rochester Castle, 1215, for instance, saw the forces of King John of England use this tactic to breach the castle's defenses and bring an end to the standoff. Diversionary tactics were also a common part of a siege commander's repertoire. By feigning retreats or launching attacks on multiple fronts, besieging forces could disorient and divide their opponents, allowing them to exploit vulnerabilities and gain the upper hand. In the Siege of Constantinople, 1453, Ottoman Sultan Mehmed II famously used a diversionary tactic by launching a naval assault on the city's sea walls while simultaneously attacking its landward defenses, ultimately leading to the fall of the Byzantine Empire. Espionage and subterfuge were also valuable tools in the siege commander's arsenal. By infiltrating enemy ranks, bribing key individuals, or spreading misinformation, commanders could create confusion and mistrust within the defending forces, weakening their resolve and paving the way for a decisive assault. During the Siege of Syracuse, 213–212 BCE, Greek general Archimedes developed a series of innovative war machines to defend the city, but even his genius could not save Syracuse when the Roman forces ultimately gained entry through betrayal and subterfuge. It is also worth noting that negotiations and diplomacy played a crucial role during medieval sieges. In many cases, a peaceful resolution could be reached through dialogue, sparing both the besiegers and the besieged the hardship and losses of a protracted battle. For instance, during the Siege of Tyre, 1187 in the Third Crusade, Saladin and Conrad of Montferrat reached an agreement that allowed the inhabitants of Tyre to leave the city unharmed, in exchange for its surrender to Saladin's forces. Engines of war, the mighty machines of medieval siege warfare. The medieval battlefield was a place of chaos and destruction, with armies clashing amidst a cacophony of steel and the cries of men. Amidst this turmoil, the engineers of the era devised ingenious machines to overcome the imposing fortifications that dotted the landscape. These siege engines, instrumental in shaping the course of countless battles, were a testament to the resourcefulness and innovation of the age. The trebuchet stands as one of the most iconic siege engines of the medieval period. Utilizing a counterweight system, these massive contraptions could hurl projectiles, such as stones or even barrels of burning pitch, over great distances with devastating accuracy. First appearing in the late 12th century, trebuchets played a significant role in several key battles, including the Siege of Jerusalem in 1099 during the First Crusade. It is said that Richard the Lionheart was so impressed by the power of these machines that he ordered the construction of his own colossal trebuchet, nicknamed Malvoisin, or Bad Neighbor, during the Siege of Acre, 1189 to 1191. Battering rams were another essential tool in the arsenal of medieval siege warfare. These engines, consisting of a large, heavy beam mounted on wheels and often adorned with a sculpted ram's head, were used to smash through the gates and walls of enemy fortifications. A prime example of their effectiveness is the Siege of Rochester Castle in 1215, where King John of England's forces utilized a battering ram to breach the castle's defenses, forcing the defenders to surrender. Siege towers, also known as belfries, were another marvel of medieval engineering. These towering structures, built on wheels and equipped with drawbridges or ladders, allowed attacking forces to scale the enemy's walls and engage in hand-to-hand combat. During the Siege of Constantinople in 1453, Ottoman Sultan Mehmed II made use of numerous siege towers in his successful campaign to capture the Byzantine capital. The sheer height and imposing presence of these machines struck fear into the hearts of defenders, and their use often marked a turning point in the course of a siege. Ballistae, a large crossbow-like weapon, were also employed during medieval sieges. These engines, capable of launching bolts or stones with great force and precision, were often used to target specific weak points in enemy fortifications or to eliminate key personnel. One legendary example of the ballista's prowess is the purported feat of the Welsh hero Owain Glyndwr, who is said to have used one to shoot an arrow through the eye slit of an English knight during the Welsh Revolt in the early 15th century. Mangonels, a type of catapult that operated using a torsion mechanism, were another popular siege engine of the medieval period. Though less powerful than the trebuchet, these machines were quicker to build and easier to maneuver, making them an attractive option for commanders in need of a versatile and effective weapon. The Siege of Gisors in 1193 saw the forces of Richard the Lionheart employing mangonels in their assault on the French-held castle, ultimately securing its surrender. The ingenuity of medieval engineers was not limited to offensive machines. Defensive contraptions, such as the murder hole, were also devised to protect besieged fortifications. These openings, typically found in the ceilings of castle gatehouses, allowed defenders to pour boiling oil or drop heavy objects onto attackers attempting to breach the entrance. The use of these formidable siege engines was not without its ethical dilemmas. On occasion, besieging forces would resort to launching diseased carcasses or human remains over the walls of enemy fortifications in an attempt to spread disease and panic among the defenders. This ghastly tactic was employed by the Mongols during the Siege of Kaffa in 1346, which is believed to have contributed to the spread of the Black Death throughout Europe. The Art of Fortification, defending the castle in the medieval era. As the engines of war grew ever more powerful, so too did the architectural and engineering innovations employed to defend the mighty fortresses that towered over the medieval landscape. From sprawling moats to impenetrable walls, the defenders of these bastions were constantly devising new strategies and techniques to keep their enemies at bay. One of the most iconic defensive features of medieval castles was the moat. Often filled with water, these deep, wide ditches encircling a fortress acted as a natural barrier to enemy forces. The moats not only impeded the movement of troops and siege engines, but also served as a deterrent against tunneling efforts aimed at undermining the fortifications. A prime example of a well-engineered moat can be found at Caerphilly Castle in Wales, built by Gilbert de Clare in the late 13th century. The castle boasts an impressive double moat system, with the outer moat being the largest in Britain, providing an added layer of protection against attackers. Drawbridges were another crucial element in the defense of medieval castles. These structures, typically spanning the moat or a ditch, could be raised or lowered to control access to the fortress. In times of peace, the drawbridge would be lowered to allow passage, while during a siege, it would be raised to deny entry to the enemy. The ingenious design of the drawbridge allowed defenders to maintain control over their fortress, even when surrounded by a hostile force. The Château de Combourg, in France, built in the 11th century, features an impressive drawbridge, demonstrating the importance of this defensive feature in medieval architecture. Arrow slits, or loopholes, were another critical innovation in medieval fortification design. These narrow, vertical openings in the walls of a castle allowed archers and crossbowmen to fire upon approaching enemies, while remaining protected from retaliatory attacks. The arrow slits were often angled, enabling defenders to cover a wide field of fire while presenting a minimal target to enemy archers. This can be seen in the design of Dover Castle in England, built during the reign of Henry II in the 12th century, which features an extensive array of arrow slits throughout its walls. In addition to these well-known features, medieval engineers employed a range of other defensive mechanisms to protect their fortifications. Portcullises, heavy metal or wooden grates that could be dropped to block entrances, were a common sight in castle gatehouses. Machicolations, openings in the floor of the castle's battlements, allowed defenders to drop stones, boiling oil, or other projectiles onto attackers below. The Alcazar of Segovia in Spain, dating back to the 12th century, is a stunning example of a fortress incorporating these and other defensive features. The ingenuity of medieval architects and engineers in creating these formidable defenses was matched only by the determination of those who sought to breach them. As siege engines grew more powerful and tactics more sophisticated, the art of fortification continued to evolve, giving rise to ever more intricate and impregnable castles. The silent siege, attrition warfare, and the grim reality of medieval conflict. In the shadow of towering walls and amid the clamor of clashing steel, the grim reality of medieval warfare was often defined not by the clash of armies, but by the slow, inexorable march of hunger and disease. Attrition warfare, the strategy of besieging forces, waiting for their opponents to succumb to starvation or illness, was an essential aspect of medieval sieges, and its impact was felt by both the defenders and besiegers alike. The Siege of Orleans in 1428 to 1429, during the 100 Years' War, provides a striking example of attrition warfare in action. As the English forces led by the Earl of Salisbury encircled the city, they established a blockade, cutting off vital supplies and trapping the inhabitants within the walls. The defenders, including Joan of Arc, fought valiantly to break the stranglehold, but with each passing day their situation grew more dire as food stocks dwindled and the spectre of starvation loomed ever larger. In a similar vein, the Great Siege of Malta in 1565 saw the Ottoman Empire's forces, led by Grand Vizier Mustafa Pasha, employing attrition tactics against the Knights Hospitaller, who defended the island fortress. Over several months, the Ottoman forces subjected the defenders to constant bombardment, while simultaneously cutting off their access to food and water. The grueling conditions took a heavy toll on both sides, with the defenders' resolve eventually bolstered by the arrival of reinforcements that helped to turn the tide of the battle. Disease, too, played a significant role in the outcome of medieval sieges. The confined spaces and unsanitary conditions within besieged fortresses provided fertile ground for the spread of illness, which could decimate the defenders' ranks and weaken their resolve. One such example is the Siege of Thessalonica in 1422 to 1430, where the defenders were ultimately forced to surrender after being ravaged by a devastating outbreak of plague within the city walls. Besieging forces were not immune to the ravages of disease either. During the Siege of Harfleur in 1415, the English army under King Henry V found itself beset by dysentery, which spread rapidly through the ranks due to the unsanitary conditions of the siege camp. The illness claimed the lives of many soldiers and weakened the fighting strength of the English forces, forcing them to abandon their initial plan to march on Paris and instead focus on the more immediate objective of capturing Harfleur. Attrition warfare was not without its ethical dilemmas, as evidenced by the controversial use of scorched earth tactics, which involved the deliberate destruction of crops, livestock, and other resources to deny the enemy sustenance. During the Chevauchée of the Black Prince in 1355, part of the 100 Years' War, the English forces laid waste to the French countryside, burning crops and slaughtering livestock in an effort to weaken the enemy by causing widespread famine and suffering. Undermining the foundations, sappers, mining, and the subterranean struggle of medieval sieges. In the shadows beneath the earth, a silent and deadly struggle unfolded during medieval sieges. While soldiers clashed on the battlefield above, sappers and miners worked tirelessly to undermine the very foundations of formidable fortresses. This dangerous and clandestine form of warfare required both ingenuity and raw determination, as attackers and defenders alike engaged in a high-stakes game of subterranean cat and mouse. Sappers, specialized soldiers trained in the art of tunneling, were a vital part of any besieging force. Their primary objective was to dig tunnels beneath the walls of the enemy fortress, weakening its foundations or causing a collapse, thereby creating a breach for their comrades to exploit. One remarkable example of this tactic can be found in the siege of Château Gaillard in 1203 to 1204. Led by King Philip II of France, the attacking forces employed sappers to undermine the fortress's outer walls. After weeks of painstaking labor, the sappers successfully brought down a section of the wall, allowing the French forces to storm the castle and claim victory. However, defenders were not without their own countermeasures. As the threat of sappers became more apparent, architects and engineers developed ingenious solutions to detect and thwart these subterranean invaders. One such innovation was the creation of listening galleries, narrow passages built within the walls of the fortress that allowed defenders to listen for the telltale sounds of tunneling. During the siege of Vienna in 1529, the city's defenders, led by Count Nicholas Salm, made extensive use of these listening galleries. As the Ottoman Empire's sappers attempted to tunnel beneath the city's walls, the defenders were able to detect their efforts and respond accordingly. By flooding the tunnels or digging their own countermines to intercept the attackers, the Viennese forces managed to stave off disaster and ultimately forced the Ottoman army to abandon the siege. Another notable example of the use of sappers and the struggle against them can be found during the Spanish Armada's siege of Ostend in 1601 to 1604. The besieging Spanish forces, led by Archduke Albert of Austria, employed sappers to undermine the city's defenses, while the Dutch defenders countered by digging their own tunnels to intercept and collapse the enemy's tunnels. This underground battle persisted for months, with both sides suffering heavy losses in the hazardous conditions of the tight, claustrophobic tunnels. In some cases, defenders would employ a tactic known as counter-scarping, which involved digging a deep trench around the outer walls of a fortress to make it more difficult for sappers to reach the foundations. This technique can be seen in the design of Beaumaris Castle in Wales, constructed in the late 13th century under the direction of Master James of St. George, a renowned military architect. Infernal flames of ancient warfare, the mysteries and impact of Greek fire. In the annals of medieval siege warfare, few weapons have captured the imagination quite like Greek fire. This enigmatic and fearsome substance, capable of engulfing entire fleets and fortifications in unstoppable flames, played a crucial role in shaping the outcome of numerous conflicts. To this day, the precise composition of Greek fire remains a closely guarded secret, only adding to the mystique surrounding its use in the heat of battle. Though its origins are murky, Greek fire is believed to have been developed by the Byzantine Empire sometime in the 7th century. The brainchild of a Syrian engineer named Callinicus of Heliopolis, this highly flammable substance was first deployed by Emperor Constantine IV in 673 during the Arab-Byzantine Wars. The Byzantine fleet, armed with Greek fire, managed to fend off a besieging Arab fleet in the Sea of Marmara, setting the stage for the weapon's legendary status. Greek fire was not a single substance, but rather a concoction of various chemicals and incendiary ingredients, including petroleum, sulfur, and quicklime. When ignited, it produced a fierce and tenacious flame that could not be extinguished by water, making it the perfect weapon for naval warfare and repelling attackers during sieges. The exact recipe for Greek fire has been lost to history, and many have tried in vain to recreate its devastating effects. One of the most famous uses of Greek fire was during the Second Arab Siege of Constantinople in 717-718. The besieging Arab forces, led by Caliph Sulayman ibn Abd al-Malik, found themselves up against the formidable Theodosian walls and the mighty Byzantine navy. Emperor Leo III, sensing the peril his city faced, ordered the deployment of Greek fire against the invading fleet. The result was a scene of chaos and destruction, as the Arab ships were engulfed in a raging inferno that could not be quenched. The siege was ultimately lifted, and Constantinople remained unbroken. Another notable instance of Greek fire's deployment occurred during the Siege of Tyre in 1124. In this case, the Byzantine Empire provided the Crusader forces with Greek fire to aid in their efforts against the defending Muslim forces. The incendiary weapon proved decisive, enabling the Crusaders to capture the city and secure a vital foothold in the Holy Land. The use of Greek fire was not without its hazards, however. In the hands of inexperienced or careless operators, the volatile substance could easily lead to friendly casualties or the loss of valuable equipment. Moreover, the secret of Greek fire was so jealously guarded by the Byzantines that it eventually faded from use as the empire declined, leaving a void in the annals of military technology. Epic clashes of iron and stone, the dramatic tales of Jerusalem and Constantinople. Throughout the Middle Ages, the fates of empires and the destinies of nations were shaped by epic sieges that would echo through the annals of history. Two of the most famous medieval sieges, the Siege of Jerusalem in 1099 during the First Crusade, and the Siege of Constantinople in 1453, which marked the fall of the Byzantine Empire, captivate the imagination with their tales of heroism, treachery, and the raw force of human will. The Siege of Jerusalem, a climactic event in the First Crusade, saw Christian knights from Europe clash with the Muslim defenders of the Holy City. Led by prominent figures such as Godfrey of Bouillon, Raymond IV of Toulouse, and Bohemond I of Taranto, the Crusaders' journey to the Holy Land had been fraught with peril and hardship. Yet upon arriving at the gates of Jerusalem in June 1099, they were filled with determination to capture the city, which held immense religious significance for both Christians and Muslims. As the Crusaders prepared for their assault, they faced numerous challenges. With limited resources, they constructed makeshift siege towers and ladders to breach the formidable walls of Jerusalem. The defenders, under the command of Fatimid governor Iftikhar ad-Dawla, fought valiantly, showering the Crusaders with arrows and stones as they attempted to scale the walls. Finally, on July 15, 1099, the Crusaders managed to breach the walls and pour into the city. The ensuing battle was fierce, with both sides fighting relentlessly. The Crusaders ultimately emerged victorious, but the aftermath was marked by a dark episode in history, as many inhabitants of the city were massacred in the chaotic aftermath of the siege. Fast forward to 1453, and the stage was set for another epic confrontation, the Siege of Constantinople. The last bastion of the once mighty Byzantine Empire, Constantinople was now in the sights of the ambitious Ottoman Sultan, Mehmed II. As the Byzantine Emperor Constantine VII looked out upon the vast Ottoman forces assembling before his city, he knew that the odds were stacked against him. Sultan Mehmed II had at his disposal a formidable array of siege engines, including the colossal Great Bombard, a massive cannon capable of hurling stone projectiles weighing nearly 600 kilograms at the city's walls. For weeks, the city was subjected to a relentless bombardment as the defenders struggled to repair the damage and repel the attackers. Constantinople's defenders employed ingenious tactics to prolong their resistance. They used a giant chain to block Ottoman ships from entering the Golden Horn, forcing the enemy to devise alternative strategies to bypass this obstacle. The Byzantines also relied on the legendary Theodosian walls, which had withstood countless sieges throughout the centuries. But on May 29, 1453, the unthinkable happened. After a fierce final assault, the Ottomans managed to breach the walls, and their forces poured into the city. Emperor Constantine VII, refusing to surrender, charged into the fray and was lost to history, his body never found. With the fall of Constantinople, the Byzantine Empire came to an end, and a new chapter in history began. Shadow of the siege, the forgotten suffering of civilians. As the clashing of steel and the thunder of siege engines echo through history, the voices of the countless civilians affected by medieval sieges often go unheard. The consequences of these prolonged conflicts on the civilian population were far-reaching, with forced labor, resource shortages, and potential for massacre upon a city's fall, casting a dark shadow over the lives of those caught in the crossfire. One stark example of the devastating impact on civilians during a siege is the Siege of Orleans in 1428 to 1429. This pivotal event during the 100 Years' War saw the English army, led by the Earl of Salisbury, besieging the strategic French city of Orléans. With food supplies dwindling and the threat of starvation looming, the civilian population of Orléans was forced to endure immense hardship. Desperate to survive, they resorted to consuming less palatable fare, such as pets and vermin. Forced labor was another common consequence of sieges, as the burden of constructing and maintaining defenses often fell on the civilian populace. During the Siege of Vienna in 1529, the inhabitants of the city were made to build earthworks, repair breaches in the walls, and perform other labor-intensive tasks as the mighty Ottoman Empire, led by Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent, laid siege to the Austrian capital. The strain of this forced labor, combined with the threat of disease and starvation, took a tremendous toll on the civilian population. In some instances, the plight of civilians caught in the midst of a siege would inspire acts of incredible heroism. During the Siege of Leiden in 1573 to 1574, as part of the 80 Years' War, the Dutch city found itself encircled by Spanish forces led by the Duke of Alba. As the people of Leiden began to succumb to famine, William the Silent, leader of the Dutch rebellion, devised a daring plan to break the siege. He ordered the deliberate flooding of the surrounding countryside, allowing the Dutch fleet to sail up to the city walls and deliver much-needed supplies, ultimately forcing the Spanish to abandon their siege. However, the consequences of sieges were not always so merciful. The Siege of Ma'ara in 1098, during the First Crusade, stands as a chilling reminder of the depths to which humanity can sink when driven by desperation. As the Crusaders laid siege to the city, food became so scarce that they resorted to the unthinkable act of cannibalism, consuming the bodies of their fallen enemies. Civilians who survived the duration of a siege were not always guaranteed safety, even upon the city's fall. The sack of Constantinople in 1204, during the Fourth Crusade, saw Crusader forces unleashed upon the city's populace, indiscriminately pillaging, looting, and perpetrating acts of violence. The devastation wrought upon the once great city was so severe that it never fully recovered, its weakened state eventually contributing to its fall in 1453. From stone to gunpowder, the evolution of siege warfare. As the centuries unfolded, the strategies and tools employed in the art of siege warfare underwent significant changes. The endless struggle between attackers and defenders led to the development of new weapons, tactics, and the transformation of fortifications under the influence of gunpowder. This dynamic interplay between offense and defense shaped the course of medieval warfare, with innovative thinkers and engineers always striving to stay one step ahead of their adversaries. The introduction of the trebuchet in the 12th century, believed to have been adapted from Chinese and Middle Eastern designs, marked a significant leap in the capability of siege engines. This powerful weapon could hurl projectiles weighing hundreds of pounds over great distances, delivering destructive force to enemy fortifications. A famous example is the trebuchet known as Warwolf, built by Edward I of England during the siege of Stirling Castle in 1304. This colossal machine, said to have been the largest trebuchet ever built, terrorized the Scottish defenders and played a decisive role in the castle's surrender. While the defenders adapted their fortifications to withstand the onslaught of trebuchets and other siege engines, they also developed new tactics and innovations to counter their adversaries. The introduction of the concentric castle design in the 13th century, with its multiple layers of walls and defensive structures, enabled defenders to better resist siege assaults. One of the finest examples of this design is the castle of Crac des Chevaliers, a crusader fortress in modern-day Syria. Its formidable defenses enabled the garrison to withstand numerous sieges, including the prolonged attack by Mamluk Sultan Baybars in 1271. The arrival of gunpowder in Europe in the 14th century, a consequence of contact with China, revolutionized siege warfare. Early cannons were crude and unreliable, but their potential for destruction was immediately apparent. The siege of Harfleur in 1415, during the Hundred Years' War, saw Henry V of England deploy a modest number of cannons to breach the city's walls, a harbinger of the changes to come. The growing use of gunpowder led to further innovation in fortifications, as the high walls and narrow towers of traditional castles proved vulnerable to cannon fire. The Star Fort, or Trace Italienne, emerged in the 15th century as a response to this new threat. These low, angular fortifications, with their extensive earthworks and interlocking fields of fire, were designed to better withstand and repel gunpowder-based attacks. A fine example is the Fortezza de Basso in Florence, Italy, built in the 16th century by Antonio da San Gallo the Younger. This imposing structure showcased the Star Fort's ability to resist even the most determined of adversaries. As siege warfare entered the gunpowder age, the arms race between attackers and defenders intensified. The French engineer Sébastien Leprest de Vauban, who served under Louis XIV in the late 17th century, became a leading figure in the design and construction of modern fortifications. Vauban's innovative techniques, such as the use of glacis and the construction of outlying defensive works, transformed the landscape of siege warfare, and his ideas continue to influence military engineering to this day. As we conclude our journey through the fascinating world of medieval siege warfare, let us remember the relentless struggle between attackers and defenders that forever altered the landscape of conflict. From the ingenious innovations of engineers like Sébastien Leprest de Vauban to the unforgettable sieges of Jerusalem and Constantinople, siege warfare stands as a testament to the resourcefulness and adaptability of humankind in the face of adversity. As the great Leonardo da Vinci once said, "There shall be wings, if the accomplishment be not for me, 'tis for some other." Indeed, medieval warfare was not only about brute force, but also the relentless pursuit of knowledge and innovation that shaped the course of human history. So, as the sun sets on the battlefields of the past, we invite you to ponder the endless pursuit of power and the indomitable spirit of those who dared to challenge the seemingly impregnable walls of history.